On a stormy night, with the wind howling through the trees and the moon casting eerie shadows, our imagination dances with fears of ancient creatures lurking in the darkness. Vampires, with their chilling allure and dark mystery, have haunted human dreams and nightmares for centuries. These creatures are more than just monsters from Gothic novels, they are deeply rooted in the folklore of many cultures, each story adding a unique twist to the vampire mythos. Vampires have always fascinated us, crossing borders and blending into various traditions. From the shadowy figures of Eastern Europe to the ghostly entities of Asia, the vampire legend has evolved in different cultures, reflecting our deepest fears and desires. In ancient times, people feared the unknown, and their fears took shape in the form of vampires. The Lamia of Greek mythology, for example, was once a beautiful queen who turned into a monstrous creature, haunting the night and preying on children. Similarly, in ancient Mesopotamian myths, the Lilu was a demon of the night, feared for its ability to drain the life force from humans. Moving eastward, the legends take on new forms. In China, the Huli Jing, or fox spirits, were believed to have the power to shapeshift and drain life energy from their victims. These creatures were not always malevolent, some were seen as protectors or bringers of fortune, adding a layer of complexity to the vampire mythos. In Japan, the Rokurokubi were known for their ability to stretch their necks and transform into eerie, predatory beings during the night. The Kappa, another Japanese entity, while not a vampire in the traditional sense, was known for luring and attacking unsuspecting humans. In Africa, the fear of vampires took on a unique form. The Asambasam and Sasabansam were creatures from West African folklore, known for their terrifying appearance and predatory habits. They were believed to have iron teeth and claws, lurking in the forests and preying on those who ventured too far from their homes. These creatures were more than just scary tales, they were warnings against straying too far from safety. European folklore, especially from Eastern Europe, gave birth to some of the most enduring vampire legends. The Slavic traditions spoke of creatures like the Strigoi and Uper, who rose from the grave to torment the living. The fear of these vampires led to grisly practices to protect the living from their wrath, such as staking corpses and placing garlic around graves. In the medieval period, the vampire myth took on a more sinister and personal dimension. Figures like Vlad the Impaler, who inspired the character of Dracula, became infamous for their cruel and bloodthirsty acts. This period solidified the vampire as a symbol of terror, blending historical cruelty with mythological horror. As we moved into the 19th and 20th centuries, vampires evolved once again. The publication of Bram Stoker's Dracula in 1897 marked a significant turning point, transforming the vampire from a folkloric monster into a charismatic and tragic figure. This change mirrored our growing fascination with the supernatural and the unknown, and the vampire became a symbol of both fear and fascination. In modern times, vampires have become icons of popular culture. They appear in countless books, movies, and TV shows, often portrayed as complex characters with emotional struggles. This evolution reflects our changing perceptions and our ongoing fascination with the dark and mysterious. The vampire mythos, from its ancient origins to its modern incarnations, has always been a reflection of human fears and desires. It connects us with the ancient past while continuing to evolve and captivate our imagination today. In the dim glow of ancient fires, long before modern horror tales were spun, people whispered of shadowy figures that roamed the night, feeding on the life of the living. These early vampire legends are woven into the very fabric of human history, with each culture adding its own chilling touch to the stories. In ancient Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, people lived in constant awe and fear of the unknown. Among their most feared beings was the Lilitu, a demoness with a thirst for blood. She was believed to prowl the night, hunting for unsuspecting victims. Her name echoes through time as Lilith, a name that would later become infamous in other mythologies. The Lilitu was not just a mere creature of the night, she was a harbinger of doom, a symbol of the fears that haunted the ancient world. The Mesopotamians also spoke of the Akimmu, restless spirits of the dead who were denied peace. These spirits were said to rise from their graves, seeking out the living to drain their vitality. They were believed to be the souls of those who had died violently or without proper burial rites. The terror they inspired was palpable. These were not mere stories, but warnings to honor the dead and keep the graveyards undisturbed. In the ancient lands of Egypt, the vampire-like entities took on a different form. Here, the blood-sucking demon was often tied to the goddess of the underworld, Sekhmet. Known for her fierce nature and thirst for blood, Sekhmet was a deity who could bring both destruction and protection. Though not a vampire in the traditional sense, her characteristics of consuming life force and her dark, fearsome presence linked her to the ancient concept of vampires. The Greek myths also feature eerie beings that could chill the blood. The Lamia, a creature of nightmare, was said to be a beautiful woman transformed into a monster. She roamed the night, preying on children and causing fear wherever she went. Her transformation from a lovely figure into a bloodthirsty predator speaks to the deep fears of transformation and loss of control that have always haunted humanity. Another figure from Greek lore, the Empusa, was a vampiric demon known for her terrifying abilities. She could shapeshift into a beautiful woman to lure her victims, only to reveal her true, horrifying form once they were in her grasp. Her name is linked to the ancient fear of being deceived and consumed by something that appeared alluring but was, in reality, deadly. These ancient legends from Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Greece each contributed to the rich tapestry of vampire mythology. They reflect humanity's age-old fears of the dark, the unknown, and the very real fears of predators hiding in the night. As these stories were passed down through generations, they evolved, merging with other myths and fears, creating the vampire legends we recognize today. On quiet, moonlit nights, as the wind whispers through the trees and the chill of the evening settles in, the ancient Slavic lands come alive with stories of restless spirits and creatures of the night. The legends of Slavic vampires are not just tales of horror, they are threads woven into the very essence of the culture, filled with dark magic and eerie rituals. The origins of Slavic vampire legends stretched back to a time when the lines between the living and the dead were thin and easily crossed. In these early stories, the vampire was not just a monster, it was a being that defied the natural order, a source of dread and fascination. The belief in these creatures was so strong that it shaped rituals and traditions, meant to ward off these malevolent beings and protect the living. One of the most feared figures in Slavic folklore is the Strigoi. These beings were believed to be the restless spirits of the dead, often the souls of those who had lived wicked lives. The Strigoi could rise from their graves and cause harm to the living, feeding on their blood and spreading disease. They were not bound by the normal rules of life and death, making them a source of endless terror. People believed that if a person died under unusual or tragic circumstances, they might return as a Strigoi, bringing misfortune to those left behind. Another chilling figure from Slavic mythology is the Uper. This creature was similar to the Strigoi but often depicted with even more terrifying traits. The Uper was said to have a fearsome appearance, with sharp teeth and a ghastly visage. It was believed to be a predator of both the living and the dead, consuming blood and life force with a relentless hunger. The Uper's presence was a constant reminder of the dangers lurking in the dark, just beyond the light of the hearth. The Rusalka is another haunting figure from Slavic tradition. Unlike the Strigoi and Uper, the Rusalka is often depicted as a beautiful young woman who drowned and now seeks vengeance. These water spirits are said to lure men to their deaths in the water, using their enchanting voices and alluring appearances. Their mournful songs and ghostly beauty are a chilling reminder of the dangers hidden beneath the surface of serene waters. The Rusalka's tragic fate and vengeful spirit make her a deeply sorrowful figure, embodying the fears of death and the unknown. To protect themselves from these dark entities, the Slavic people developed elaborate rituals and practices. To prevent a corpse from becoming a Strigoi or Uper, people would drive a stake through the heart or place objects like scythes and sickles on the body. These rituals were meant to keep the dead from rising and spreading their malevolence. Garlic, holy symbols, and other protective charms were used to ward off these creatures, reflecting a deep-seated fear of the supernatural. When it came to dealing with the Rusalka, people believed in rituals to appease the spirit or protect against its vengeful acts. Offerings and prayers were made to calm the restless souls of the drowned, and certain days of the year were marked as especially dangerous, requiring extra precautions to avoid encountering these spirits. The Slavic vampire legends are more than just ghost stories, they are a reflection of the cultural fears and practices of the people who believed in them. Each figure, from the bloodthirsty Strigoi to the sorrowful Rusalka, carries with it a sense of unease and a reminder of the fragile boundary between the living and the dead. These tales, with their haunting rituals and terrifying figures, continue to captivate and chill, keeping the ancient fears alive in the whispers of the night. As the night falls and shadows stretch long across the land, tales of vampiric creatures from Asia come alive, whispering through the dark like chilling echoes from another world. In these stories, the boundaries between human and monster blur, creating an atmosphere of dread and fascination that stirs the deepest fears of the unknown. In China, the Huli Jing, or fox spirits, haunt the night with an eerie grace. These beings are not merely supernatural, they are shapeshifters with the power to transform into beautiful women to lure unsuspecting men. Yet beneath their alluring exterior lies a predatory nature. Huli Jing can drain life energy, leaving their victims weakened and lifeless. Their seductive charm and their deadly hunger create a disturbing contrast, making them both mesmerizing and terrifying. The fear of encountering a Huli Jing reflects a deep-seated anxiety about being deceived and consumed by something that appears beautiful but is fundamentally dangerous. Moving to Japan, the Rokurokubi offers another glimpse into the macabre. By day, they seem like ordinary people, but by night, they transform into beings with horrifying abilities. Their most disturbing trait is their elongated necks, which can stretch unnaturally long, allowing them to spy on and terrify their victims. The Rokurokubi's transformation from benign to monstrous highlights the fear of the hidden dangers that lie beneath the surface of everyday life. Their ability to blend in and then reveal their true nature taps into primal fears of deception and the unknown. Alongside the Rokurokubi, Japan also speaks of the kappa, a creature that resides in water and has a thirst for blood. Though not a vampire in the traditional sense, the kappa is a malevolent spirit known for its ability to lure people into the water, where it drags them to a watery grave. This creature's connection to water and its predatory behavior create a chilling image of the dangers that lurk beneath the calm surface of rivers and ponds. The kappa's eerie presence and its malevolent actions reflect ancient fears of drowning and the unseen threats of the natural world. In Southeast Asia, vampire myths take on even more diverse and terrifying forms. The Penanggalan, a creature from Malay folklore, is a ghostly figure that appears as a beautiful woman by day. At night, her head detaches from her body, hanging from a mass of bloody intestines. She flies through the air in search of victims, often targeting pregnant women and newborns to feed on their blood. The grotesque image of the Penanggalan, with her head floating through the night and her insatiable hunger, creates a visceral sense of horror that taps into fears of mortality and the vulnerability of the most innocent. The Aswang, a creature from Philippine mythology, presents another terrifying vision. This entity can change shape and is known for its insidious ability to drain blood and eat flesh. It often preys on pregnant women and children, embodying a deep fear of the monstrous and predatory forces that lurk within the human community. The Aswang's dual nature, being able to blend into society while hiding its monstrous traits, reflects anxieties about the dangers that can arise from the seemingly normal and familiar. These Asian vampire myths paint a vivid picture of the dark and terrifying aspects of the supernatural. Each creature, from the seductive Huli Jing to the grotesque Penanggalan, embodies unique fears and reflects cultural anxieties about the unseen and the unknown. They serve as a chilling reminder of the thin line between the ordinary and the extraordinary, the beautiful and the horrific, keeping alive the ancient fears that still haunt the darkest corners of our imagination. In the shadowy depths of the African night, where the moonlight barely touches the ground and the air is thick with mystery, ancient legends of vampiric creatures come to life. These tales are not just stories, they are reflections of deep-seated fears and cultural beliefs, carried through generations. In West Africa, the Asambasam and Sasabansam are among the most feared and fascinating figures of folklore. The Asambasam is known for its terrifying appearance, clawed hands and iron teeth, capable of tearing through flesh and bone. It is said to live in the dense forest, lying in wait for unsuspecting victims who stray too far from safety. The very sight of the Asambasam is enough to send chills down the spine, as it is not just a creature of nightmares, but a symbol of the dangers that lurk in the unexplored wilderness. The Sasabansum, another menacing entity from West African mythology, shares similarities with the Asambasam but is even more grotesque. Often depicted with a long, twisted body and a thirst for human blood, the Sasabansum is believed to hang from trees, waiting for the right moment to pounce on its prey. The legends surrounding the Sasabansum serve as a grim reminder of the perils of the forest and the thin veil that separates safety from terror. Moving to southern and East Africa, the vampire myths take on different forms. In Zimbabwe, there are tales of the Chetso, a creature that preys on humans, particularly targeting those who have ventured into forbidden or sacred areas. This being embodies the fear of transgressing cultural boundaries and the consequences of ignoring traditional taboos. In Kenya, the legend of the Magumba or Kafuka describes a vampire-like being that is said to inhabit the remote regions. The Magumba is often associated with dark magic and is believed to have the power to cause illness and misfortune. It preys on people at night, feeding on their life force and leaving them weakened and vulnerable. The rituals and beliefs surrounding these vampiric entities are deeply embedded in the cultural fabric of these communities. In West Africa, protective rituals are performed to ward off these menacing beings. People use charms, amulets, and specific incantations to shield themselves from the Asambasam and Sasabansum. Rituals often involve offerings to appease the spirits and ensure safe passage through the forests. These practices reflect a profound respect for the unseen forces of the world and a desire to maintain harmony with the supernatural. In Southern and East Africa, similar protective measures are taken to guard against vampiric threats. Rituals might include sacrifices or ceremonies performed to ensure the safety of those who live near areas believed to be haunted by creatures like the Chetso and Magumba. The community comes together to perform these rites, reinforcing the collective belief in the power of these entities and the need for protective measures. These legends and rituals from African folklore paint a vivid picture of the fears and beliefs surrounding vampiric entities. Each story, from the clawed Asambasam to the magical Magumba, reveals a deep connection between the supernatural and the natural world, highlighting the universal human experience of confronting the unknown. Through these stories and rituals, the people of Africa continue to keep alive the ancient fears and the ways to protect themselves from the darkness that lurks just beyond the light. In the shadowy corners of European history, where darkness clings to every story and the past seems to whisper through the ages, vampire legends take on a life of their own. These tales, rich in mystery and fear, have shaped the way we view vampires today, leaving an indelible mark on modern horror. Eastern European myths have cast a long shadow over the world of vampires, coloring them with a sense of dread that continues to captivate. The legends from this region, filled with tales of restless spirits and bloodthirsty creatures, have laid the groundwork for many modern vampire stories. In places like Romania and Hungary, the vampire is not just a monster but a deeply feared entity that could bring illness and death. These early myths describe vampires as revenants, creatures that rise from their graves to prey on the living. They are depicted with fearsome traits, pale skin, sharp fangs, and a thirst for blood that drives them to terrorize villages. These early Eastern European legends, with their chilling details and dark allure, have influenced countless stories and movies, creating an archetype that still haunts the pages of modern fiction. Among the historical figures that have seeped into vampire lore, none is as infamous as Vlad the Impaler. Known for his brutal methods of punishing enemies, Vlad's legacy of impalement and cruelty created a chilling image that would later inspire the vampire legend of Dracula. His ruthless reputation, combined with the legends of his cruelty, transformed him into a figure of nightmarish fear. The historical Vlad, with his penchant for impaling his foes, became intertwined with the myth of the vampire, blurring the lines between fact and fiction. His story contributes to the haunting legacy of vampires, adding a layer of historical dread to the already terrifying tales of Eastern Europe. As vampire lore spread through medieval Europe, it evolved and took on new forms. The medieval period was a time when superstition and fear of the supernatural were widespread. Stories of the undead, particularly those that involved vampires, became a way for people to explain unexplained deaths and diseases. Vampires were believed to be the cause of plagues and other ailments, seen as the embodiment of death itself. People went to great lengths to protect themselves from these creatures, using garlic, holy water, and stakes through the heart as protective measures. These practices, born out of fear and desperation, reflect the deep-seated anxiety that vampires represented in medieval Europe. The evolution of vampire lore during this time reflects a growing fascination with the macabre. As stories of vampires spread, they became more elaborate, incorporating elements of horror and supernatural terror. Vampires began to be portrayed as not just creatures of the night, but as sophisticated and seductive beings capable of influencing and corrupting the living. This evolution paved the way for the modern vampire, blending elements of horror, seduction, and mystery into a figure that continues to haunt our imaginations. The legends and historical figures that shaped European vampire lore have left a lasting impact on how we view these creatures today. From the terrifying revenants of Eastern Europe to the historical horrors of Vlad the Impaler and the evolving tales of the medieval period, these stories have created a rich and chilling tapestry that continues to influence the world of horror. Each tale adds a layer of fear and fascination, keeping the vampire legend alive and terrifying in the darkest corners of our minds. The eerie chill of a midnight breeze, the distant howls of unseen creatures, and the shadowed corners of old castles all bring to mind the haunting allure of vampires. These creatures have roamed the pages of literature and screens of modern media, evolving from ancient fears to timeless icons of horror and desire. Vampires first made their mark in classical literature with a blend of myth and artistic imagination. In the 19th century, authors began to explore these dark creatures with a new depth and sophistication. One of the earliest and most influential works was John Polidori's The Vampire, written in 1819. This story introduced the world to Lord Ruthven, a vampire who was both charismatic and terrifying, setting the stage for how vampires would be portrayed in literature. This tale transformed the vampire from a mere monster into a figure of allure and danger, a seducer who could charm and manipulate those around him. The Gothic novels of the 19th century further cemented the vampire's place in literary history. Bram Stoker's Dracula, published in 1897, is perhaps the most famous example. Dracula, with his sinister charm and thirst for blood, became the archetype of the vampire in Western culture. Stoker's novel depicted vampires as both predators and tragic figures, blending horror with a sense of melancholy that captivated readers. The character of Dracula, with his dark charisma and supernatural powers, redefined vampires as complex beings with a dual nature, both seductive and monstrous. This portrayal of vampires as both alluring and dangerous has remained a staple in vampire literature. As literature evolved, so did the depiction of vampires. The 20th century saw a shift in how these creatures were portrayed, influenced heavily by the Gothic tradition but adding new dimensions. Vampire tales began to explore themes of immortality, loneliness, and the moral ambiguity of eternal life. And Rice's The Vampire Chronicles, starting with Interview with the Vampire in 1976, offered a modern take on the vampire mythos, presenting vampires as tragic, introspective beings grappling with their immortality. Rice's work introduced readers to a more nuanced view of vampires, emphasizing their inner struggles and emotional depth. The transformation of vampires continued as they entered contemporary media. Films and television shows brought vampires to a new audience, and the portrayal of these creatures shifted once again. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, movies like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Twilight redefined the vampire for a new generation. Buffy the Vampire Slayer combined action with humor, presenting vampires as both villains and victims, while Twilight introduced a romanticized version of the vampire, focusing on themes of love and eternal youth. These modern portrayals have turned vampires into symbols of desire, romance, and conflict, drawing on their timeless appeal but with a contemporary twist. Television series such as True Blood and The Vampire Diaries have continued to explore the vampire mythos, often blending horror with romance and drama. These shows present vampires as complex characters with their own societies, struggles, and moral dilemmas. The evolution of vampires in modern media reflects a growing fascination with the supernatural as a mirror for human emotions and relationships. Vampires are no longer just creatures of fear, but are also symbols of desire, conflict, and the search for meaning in a world that is both alluring and perilous. Through literature and popular culture, the vampire has evolved from a terrifying monster of ancient folklore into a multifaceted figure that embodies a wide range of human experiences. From the Gothic novels of the past to the films and TV shows of today, vampires continue to capture our imaginations, representing our deepest fears and our most profound desires. They remain a testament to the enduring power of storytelling and the timeless appeal of the supernatural. In the dark recesses of ancient fears, where shadows blend with the night, people once turned to eerie and powerful methods to protect themselves from the terror of vampires. These dark creatures were more than just figments of imagination. They were seen as real threats, so communities devised a variety of traditional methods to keep them at bay. In Eastern Europe, where vampire legends run deep, the fear of the undead was taken very seriously. People believed that vampires could come back from the dead to harm the living, so they employed some unusual and grim methods to protect themselves. One of the most common practices was the use of garlic. It was thought that the pungent smell of garlic would drive away vampires and keep them from entering homes. People would hang garlic bulbs around their doors and windows, or even place them under pillows, hoping that the strong odor would ward off any lurking vampires. Another method was the use of holy symbols. Religious icons, such as crucifixes or holy water, were believed to have protective powers. People would sprinkle holy water around their homes or carry small crosses to keep the undead at bay. These symbols were thought to hold the power to repel the supernatural forces, providing a barrier between the living and the dead. In some cultures, the idea of staking a vampire through the heart became a well-known practice. This method was thought to be the only way to ensure that a vampire would not rise again. The stake was usually made of wood, and it was driven through the heart of the corpse to prevent it from returning to life. This gruesome practice reflects the intense fear people had of these creatures and their determination to protect themselves from harm. Historical vampire hunts were another dark chapter in the history of vampirism. In the 18th and 19th centuries, fear of vampires led to actual hunts and trials where people were accused of being vampires. These hunts were driven by fear and superstition, often leading to tragic and brutal consequences. In some cases, entire villages would become involved in these hunts, seeking out suspected vampires and performing horrific rituals to rid their communities of these perceived threats. One infamous example of this is the case of the vampire panic in New England during the 19th century. The death of a loved one from tuberculosis, known then as consumption, was often attributed to vampire activity. Families would exhume the bodies of deceased relatives, searching for signs of vampirism such as bloating or blood at the mouth. If any such signs were found, the body was often subjected to horrifying treatments, including staking and burning, in a desperate attempt to prevent the deceased from rising again. Across different cultures, various rituals and practices were developed to prevent vampirism. In parts of Africa, for example, people believed that certain charms and rituals could protect against vampire attacks. These might include wearing specific amulets or performing ceremonies to appease spirits and ensure safety. Such practices reflect a deep-seated belief in the power of ritual to ward off supernatural dangers. In Asian cultures, there were also unique methods to prevent vampirism. In China, people believed in the power of special talismans and rituals to protect against vampires. These might include burning incense or placing protective items around the home. The belief in these protective measures was rooted in a deep respect for the supernatural and a desire to maintain harmony between the living and the spirit world. These folkloric practices, from garlic to holy water and from staking to ritualistic protection, reveal the profound impact that vampire legends had on people's lives. The fear of vampires drove communities to take extreme measures to protect themselves from these terrifying beings. The rituals and methods used were not just about superstition, but were deeply ingrained in the cultural fabric of societies that grappled with the unknown. Each practice, each ritual, was a testament to the intense fear and the lengths people would go to ensure their safety from the darkness that lurked just beyond the light. The shadowy figure of a vampire, slipping through the night and leaving a trail of fear, taps into something profoundly unsettling in the human psyche. These creatures, with their eternal thirst for blood and their unholy immortality, have always been more than just monsters. They hold deep, symbolic meanings that resonate across cultures and time. In various cultures, vampires symbolize a host of fears and desires. In many societies, they represent the unknown and the unexplainable. They are the embodiment of death and disease, often seen as a punishment or a curse for moral failings. In Eastern Europe, for example, the vampire often stands for the fear of death and the unknown afterlife. These creatures symbolize the terror of the dead returning to disturb the living, reflecting a cultural anxiety about the finality of death and what might lie beyond it. In other cultures, vampires symbolize the loss of control and the invasive nature of fear. When a vampire enters a home, it is a direct invasion of personal space, a breach of safety that mirrors deeper psychological fears. Psychological theories offer insights into why vampires evoke such powerful reactions. One theory suggests that vampires tap into primal fears related to death and immortality. The idea of living forever, but at the cost of one's humanity, is a deeply unsettling concept. It raises questions about what it means to be alive and what we would become if we were freed from the constraints of mortality. This fear of eternal life, combined with the horror of consuming blood for survival, creates a potent mix of dread and fascination. Another theory posits that the vampire myth plays into fears of disease and contagion. Historically, before the advent of modern medicine, diseases like tuberculosis were often attributed to supernatural causes. The image of a vampire draining the life from its victims mirrors the way disease saps vitality, and the vampire becomes a metaphor for the invisible, terrifying spread of illness. This connection between vampires and disease highlights the human tendency to personify abstract fears into concrete, frightening figures. In literature and psychology, vampires are often used as metaphors to explore complex human emotions and societal issues. They represent the struggle between desire and morality, as seen in works like Bram Stoker's Dracula, where the vampire's seductive allure conflicts with its monstrous nature. Vampires in literature often embody forbidden desires, exploring themes of lust, power, and the transgression of societal norms. These stories examine the darker side of human nature and our fears about losing control. In psychology, vampires can symbolize the inner conflicts and unresolved issues within individuals. The vampire's eternal life can represent the way people struggle with their own feelings of immortality or insignificance. The vampire's need to feed on others can be seen as a metaphor for dependency and the fear of being consumed by one's own desires. Through these lenses, vampires become more than just creatures of horror. They reflect deeper, more personal fears and struggles. The way vampires are portrayed in literature and psychology reveals much about our collective anxieties and desires. They are not just monsters to be feared, but symbols of deeper psychological and cultural issues. As these creatures continue to haunt our stories and our nightmares, they remind us of the darkness that lies just beneath the surface of our everyday lives. The fear of the vampire is a reflection of our deepest concerns about life, death, and the nature of our own existence, making these stories as compelling as they are terrifying. As twilight casts its shadow across the world, the legend of the vampire continues to evolve, shifting and transforming with each passing generation. The fearsome figure of the vampire, once a mere creature of myth, has become a complex and intriguing symbol in modern storytelling. What does the future hold for these enigmatic beings who have captivated our imaginations for centuries? Emerging trends in vampire myths reveal a fascinating shift. No longer are vampires just the monstrous, fearsome creatures of old. They are evolving into beings with a broad spectrum of emotions and motivations. In recent years, vampire stories have explored themes of redemption and humanity. Modern vampires are often depicted as conflicted characters, struggling with their own dark nature and seeking a way to live in harmony with their human counterparts. This evolution reflects a broader cultural shift toward understanding and empathy, where even the most feared creatures are given a chance to explore their inner struggles and seek redemption. Contemporary fantasy and horror genres have embraced these new interpretations of vampires with open arms. In television shows and movies, vampires are no longer purely evil entities, but complex characters with their own narratives and personal battles. They are depicted as individuals grappling with their own existence, often caught between their predatory instincts and a desire for connection and love. This shift has made vampires more relatable and intriguing, blurring the lines between monster and misunderstood soul. Vampire lore in modern media often reflects societal concerns and desires. For instance, themes of immortality and the burden of living forever are frequently explored, mirroring contemporary anxieties about aging and the passage of time. Vampires are sometimes portrayed as symbols of resistance against a world that seems to be moving too fast, or as figures who question the value of eternal life when it means watching the world change and friends grow old. These modern interpretations resonate deeply with audiences, tapping into universal fears about the fleeting nature of life and the desire for something more enduring. As we look to the future, predictions for vampire lore suggest that these beings will continue to evolve in response to our changing world. Advances in technology and shifts in cultural attitudes may lead to new and unexpected portrayals of vampires. With the rise of virtual reality and immersive storytelling, we might see vampires in entirely new forms of media, engaging audiences in ways that blur the line between fiction and reality. Imagine a world where you could experience the life of a vampire firsthand, exploring their complex emotions and struggles in an interactive environment. Additionally, as societal concerns shift, vampire stories may increasingly reflect issues such as climate change, social justice, and the ethical implications of scientific advancements. Vampires could become symbols of environmental concerns, representing the consequences of humanity's actions on the planet. Alternatively, they might be used to explore themes of social inequality and the quest for justice, reflecting the struggles of marginalized groups in a world where power dynamics are constantly shifting. The future of vampire mythology promises to be as rich and varied as the past. These creatures, who have haunted our imaginations for centuries, will likely continue to evolve and adapt, reflecting the changing fears, desires, and concerns of each new generation. As long as there are stories to tell and fears to confront, the vampire will remain a powerful and evocative symbol in our collective consciousness, forever intertwined with the mysteries of our darkest fears and deepest hopes.